Al Jazeera senior political analyst. Marwan, you're joining us from Paris. What beggars belief here in all of this, Marwan, is that aid agencies and the UN have been warning about precisely this, not for days, not for weeks, but for months.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's not coincidental. I mean, they're not exactly, inspired by divine intervention. We've been seeing a pattern here by the Israelis. There is an intent to starve the people in Gaza. I think it's a cheap way for the Israelis to be killing and harming and make Palestinians suffering as much as possible on the cheap. It's certainly cheaper than bombing them, for example. It's just to make them starve through this besieging of all crossings and making sure that food does not get to people. So this has been a state terror on the part of Israel. It's trying to, for the time being, tactically speaking, put as much pressure on Hamas as possible in order to extract as much concessions as possible by making the people in Gaza suffer as much as possible.
You've chronicled for us, Marwan, not just this Gaza war, but the previous ones as well. And I wonder, since you're usually the one, who tells us to see the wood for the trees, see the forest for the trees, and to watch the deeds rather than the public statements coming out of Israel, did you, 5 months ago, see something like this coming?
Well, in fact, on the 12th, if I remember correctly, of October, I wrote under the title, Manufacturing the Case for Genocide. It was clear 5 days after the attack of October 7 that Israel, the United States, and some European leaders were paving the ground for a genocide by, for example, among others, comparing Hamas to ISIS and comparing October 7 to 9/11 and so on and so forth, making it clear that the response is going to be indiscriminate, it's going to be total, it's going to be a total war, and it's going to involve the population of Gaza. And as soon as the Israeli president and then every other official in Israel said there are no innocents in Gaza, it was clear there was an intent to make people in Gaza suffer and perhaps get rid of them if possible. Now, if you listen finally, to the European officials where I am, Josep Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, declared today that Gaza is not on the brink of famine. It is in a state of famine. So the Europeans are coming to their senses, and they're seeing what we saw 5 months ago, that they've been complicit, in fact, in a genocide. What was the Israeli foreign minister's response to the EU chief claim that Israel is weaponizing hunger and famine is already a state of affair in Gaza? He said, and listen to this, it's food for thought. The Israeli foreign minister Katz said, UNRWA is conspiring to disrupt food deliveries in Gaza. That Israel is doing everything possible to get food and humanitarian aid to Gaza, but UNRWA is disrupting food to Gaza. I mean, deception, lying, and with such vulgarity by the Israelis, where they are denying the Palestinians food, while they are in fact starving food, has reached a new level of such absurdity. We don't know whether to, hurt for the Palestinians or just laugh at the Israelis.
But these Israeli claims that this is all UNRWA's fault, I think it's fair to say they're not working. Nobody is buying this. I'm yet to hear of anybody, any expert, any guest I've spoken to, anyone for the last 5 months, at least outside of Israel, who doesn't blame Israel for this. So we've already seen 23 Palestinians die of malnutrition and dehydration. More will continue to die, as is likely and as was starkly laid out in the report. Israel will get blamed for this. So the question is, do they care?
You'd be surprised, by the way, because Israel, of course, claims that UNRWA is conspiring with Hamas, right? Because out of the 13,000 staff that work for UNRWA, they apparently shaken a handful of staff to say that they apparently, reportedly, by the Israelis, with no independent verification that 6 out of 13,000 apparently cooperate with Hamas or something. So the Israelis have been deceiving the public for 5 months. And look, I mean, despite the German Chancellor yesterday and the EU President van der Leyen also yesterday, and today Joseph Borrell, and the Americans themselves, President Biden, talking about the humanitarian, but no one, Cyril, no one is doing anything about it. It's only words. There are no deeds. They are talking the talk, but they're certainly not walking their talk. They're not using leverage against Israel or in Israel. They're not putting enough pressure to make sure that Israel does deliver the food. The fact that they started dropping food from the air and bringing it by sea because they simply could not force Israel's hands to allow food in enough to feed the people in Gaza goes a long way to show you how bankrupt Israel's ally in the West have been 5 months into an unraveling genocide in plain sight, on TV screen, in Paris, London, Washington, and Berlin.
Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, thank you very much.